Hello, everyone. Sorry we're starting a little bit late. Technical difficulties. I'm here talking to Jerry Barnett, the writer of Porn Panic, campaigner as sex and censorship, free speech, sexual expression, all those kind of things. And like me, he's got a background in the old left and is kind of critical of the new left. So we should have a lot of interesting stuff to talk about. But what I want to kick off with is that I know a lot of people are very concerned for various reasons about the incoming age verification system that's coming in to view pornography from the UK. And also certain sites are going to be blocked, which seems to have eluded people's attention. So, hi, Jerry. So let's talk about this authoritarian censorship coming from the government, shall we?
Yeah, sure. I think I've been tracking it. I ran a porn site back in the day from about 2004 till 2012-ish. And I was very involved with trying to stay on the right side of regulation. So I've been tracking this for a long time, over 10 years, well over a decade. And it was kind of obvious. Before that, I was running a technology business, and I've been involved with the web since about 94. And it was kind of obvious from really early on that the authorities wouldn't sit back and let this cut through all of their nicely built censorship powers. So, yeah, I mean, what's happening in July the 15th, I think, is that they flick the switch live on an age verification system. And the idea is that compliant porn sites, which means that the biggest commercial porn sites, from that day on, if they register that you're on a UK IP address, they will ask you to verify your age before they let you in to see the porn. And this, of course, has been sold as a child protection measure. And of course, you know, who could oppose protecting children online from all the terrible dangers out there?
Yeah.
So I've been tracking what's going on and kind of documenting this, and it followed many years of moral panic, in particular from anti-porn feminist groups and their friendly media, especially The Guardian. And simultaneously it followed some careful campaigning from within the media, from within, you could say, call it the British censorship industry, which primarily means Ofcom, which is a huge organization, and also the BBFC, which traditionally has put certificates on DVDs, so on. So yeah, it's presented as kind of common sense and innocuous, that if you want to look at porn, then you should be an adult, and if you're an adult, you can prove you're an adult, and you shouldn't have a problem with proving you're an adult. So from July the 15th, you'll go to Pornhub. It will say you're in the UK. You need to verify your age, and then you'll have to verify your age. And in order to do that, you need a credit card. I mean, there are a bunch of ways of doing it. You can do it with the credit card. You can do it with the document, I believe. You can do it with, there are going to be over-the-counter cards sold, so you can do it anonymously by going up to a kind of a tobacco stand in the supermarket or wherever, and asking for an age verification card. And then you can type it in, and you'll be anonymously verified, and get a token, and you can continue to look at these porn sites. So that all sounds kind of maybe slightly a bit of a hassle, but not the end of the world. A lot of people are focused on the privacy aspect, which is a potential issue, because you are, of course, you are providing personal information in order to verify. And I don't see the privacy aspect as in any way the biggest problem with this. I mean, the systems, the age verification systems, are going to have to be certified by the government or by the British state. they will have to jump through a bunch of hoops in terms of not linking personal information with porn site access, and so on. And there are anonymous ways of doing it. So, I mean, of course, there's potential for hacks and so on.
Yeah.
But actually, these things have been designed fairly carefully to make sure that the information about you and the information about what you're accessing is unlinkable, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the major problem. And the fact that, so that's not a huge problem. The huge problem comes really when you consider how they're going to enforce this. So the reason that big companies in the US, especially MindGeek, which owns most of the biggest porn sites, the reason they're going to play along is that, well, from day one, they'll be blocked in the UK. And there are also other sanctions that the state will be able to take. So, for example, they'll be able to go to payment providers that are linked with these businesses and instruct them not to take payments anymore, and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And more. But you know, it makes sense for Pornhub to play along. I think the UK represents 10 or 15% of its traffic, so it's a reasonable chunk, and it makes sense for them to comply. The other thing is that if Pornhub had, or if any of these companies have employees in the UK, then, or directors in the UK, then they don't want to break UK law. This is more than just a regulation now. This is a UK law.
Yeah.
And Pornhub's directors in the UK don't want to be arrested or accused of providing porn to children and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So they've kind of been arm twisted into playing along. The UK industry has been particularly enthusiastic about implementing this, at least the bigger players, especially Television X, because what it does is it closes, it takes them back to a golden age about 12, 13 years ago, before free porn was easily accessible and when people actually paid for porn. And I think the dream of the commercial porn industry is that this will raise the barrier to entry for accessing free porn. It will make it harder to access free porn, and that some people will go back to joining nice above board sites and paying for their pornography again. So I don't know exactly how many people have signed up, have decided to age verify and go with this. But yeah, so if they don't and they allow access to UK traffic, then they're basically breaking the law. The question then comes, what's the definition of pornography according to the law? And the definition of porn is very broad. It involves, it talks about, it's not just sexual imagery, it's nude imagery, and it's not just video, it's still images. So that sites, so that this could cover erotica and erotic blogs and pornographic blogs and all that kind of thing. And I've heard an informal estimate that there are about 4 million sites that fall within the UK government's definition of pornography on the internet.
Yeah.
So if you assume that a few hundred websites are going to comply and that 4 million should comply, then you have this massive kind of gap, and potentially millions of websites being blocked. And this is the really worrying bit, because in order to block millions of sites, you need a censorship system. You need a government approved censor who can create a blacklist and can instruct ISPs to block everything on the blacklist.
Yeah.
And then you need ISPs forced to comply. And that's what the Digital Economy Act does. Basically, ISPs that the censor is the BBFC, the British Board of Film Censorship, the British Board of Film Classification. It used to be called the British Board of Film Censorship, but ironically it changed its name.
That's funny.
Yeah. So it's, the British Board of Film Classification, BBFC, which is a private organization, can draw up a list of non-compliant sites, and ISPs are obliged from June the 15th to block sites on this list. So what starts as a fairly reasonable sounding thing that children are going to be stopped from looking at porn sites ends up with a firewall implemented nationwide that will block hundreds of thousands, probably millions of sites that are pornographic but don't verify the age of the customer.
Right. Okay. So yeah, that does sound a lot more concerning. I mean, there's plenty of workarounds for the tech savvy to get around the age verification thing. I mean, VPNs, proxies. There's probably going to be a rather robust black market in verification cards, I would imagine, rather quickly. Even a lot of the proponents of this have been saying that, 90% of people, it's not going to catch. So the question kind of becomes why they're doing it.
I think the reason they're doing it is because you have to start somewhere, and this is where to an extent, I put my conspiracy hat on, but I would point out that I've been involved on the inside with a lot of these discussions, that I was there meeting the BBFC 12 years ago to talk about how they plan to control internet content.
Mm-hmm.
And the BBFC is a fairly small body, but it's working under the remit of Ofcom. And Ofcom is a massive organization.
Oh, you still there?
Hundreds of millions of budget, which has the power to censor TV and radio. And I think if you look into the background of this, then a lot of it has been about Ofcom saying, look, we're losing our power. The Netflixes and the YouTubes and the Pornhubs of this world are all able to broadcast into the UK and circumvent this structure, these systems of control that we've put in place over decades.
Yeah.
And being British and very paternalistic, rather than accept the new world, which a lot of democratic countries have done, the British state and the British media regulators have spent a long time working out how they can fight back against the internet and retain their power to control what can be seen in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, people listening from outside the UK may not appreciate what it used to be like here. I mean, if you wanted porn, it was generally very soft-core, and I think most people's experience was finding a damp copy of Razzle in a hedge or something somewhere. And hardcore porn was very difficult to get hold of in this country.
Yeah, hardcore porn has always been either illegal or just not tolerated by the authorities, even.
And then the internet kind of blew a hole in that, and there was a massive. There was
in the early days, the mid 90s, the internet very quickly blew a hole in UK powers, and most people outside the UK won't appreciate it, because in North America and most of Europe, there was fairly easy access to hardcore porn, both on TV and DVD. In the UK, hardcore porn was banned on TV, and it still is. There's never been hardcore porn allowed on TV. And on DVD, it was banned until the porn industry fought a legal case in 2000. Basically, there was no legal access to hardcore pornography. In fact, I mean, the two things that happened simultaneously, one was the rise of the internet and the ability to access imagery easily. And the other, around the same time, was the rise of the European Union, the Maastricht Treaty, the deregulation of airfares and so on, when in the early 90s, we went from being this kind of backward little isolated island to being able to jump on an EasyJet flight and pop over to Amsterdam for the weekend, get stoned, and come back with a bunch of DVDs. So, it wasn't just the internet, it was internationalism in general, that the softening of borders, both caused by the deregulation of travel in the EU and caused by the internet, that kind of led to this a new freedom. And because it's now over 20 years old, so most British people have no idea or can barely remember what it was like. But yeah, I mean, in the old days, the only way to access most hardcore porn was distributed from friend to friend on bad, 10th generation VHS tapes and things
Yeah.
like that.
You could barely make out what was on it.
Yeah.
I remember vividly.
Yeah, the sound went, and then the picture went.
Yeah. That's how far we've come and how much we stand to lose again. There's one thing you brought up there that that struck me as interesting. You said, places like Television X and these bigger companies are in favor of this censorship because they believe it will drive people back to them. What we saw in it's like music piracy and film piracy and so on was kind of the opposite way. They made it so much easier to watch movies online legally, paying relatively small amounts of money, and so much cheaper and easier to get music online that it became more of a hassle to pirate it.
Yeah.
So they kind of went the opposite direction there. So you'd think they'd learn from that lesson.
Yeah, well, there's politics with the tube sites. So tube sites, Pornhub and YouPorn and so on. In theory, they're user-generated content sites, and they all popped up around 12 years ago. But in practice, what they did was encourage pirated content to be uploaded. So all of the people making porn justifiably were angry because they saw their stuff being given away and streamed for free on YouPorn and Pornhub. So you can understand why porn makers were upset about that. So to an extent, I think the porn industry would like to go the way the music industry has, in terms of at least charging a small monthly fee or something to be able to stream as much as you want. Or, the good old days, 12 years ago, you paid 10 or 20 quid to rent a single movie. I don't think anyone's expecting those days to come back. But the porn industry, the rest of the porn industry, hates MindGeek and its free sites with a vengeance, because I mean, MindGeek was based, especially in the early days, heavily on piracy, and pretending that this was user generated rather than pirated content. And MindGeek's model is to sell advertising and to also sell their premium products on the back of the free stuff. So Pornhub Premium, but MindGeek basically crushed the industry that existed a decade ago, and then bought up all these distressed studios. So they bought Playboy, they bought I'm trying to remember basically all of the big,
all of them.
All the big names, all the big porn studios a decade ago, and now mostly owned by MindGeek.
Yeah, and yet they're the ones being given so much control over this verification system.
Yeah, well, there's kind of there's a cooperation going on here. The British system won't work without MindGeek on board. So, there's both pressure on MindGeek, but also the British state is prepared to give MindGeek a lot of power and say in the system, because it's a symbiosis. MindGeek needed to give credibility to the censorship system, and the censorship system needs MindGeek on board. I think it's the same thing. So I don't think MindGeek were particularly enthusiastic to come on board with it, but having realized it was in their interest to come on board, they're set to massively benefit from it. So they've introduced their own age verification system. There are a number of competing age verification systems, and it should be noted that the AV industry has been desperate for this to happen, because this is a niche industry going huge, mega mainstream, taking on millions of customers in the UK.
I mean, some people will dismiss the concerns that we have about this as being a slippery slope fallacy. But I think if we look to what's happened in the private sphere in terms of censorship, we can see that, you know, it has been getting tighter and worse over time. You look at YouTube's Adpocalypse, Google's Blogger platform got rid of erotica. Amazon sort of removes adult material from searches unless you're very specific. You know, this kind of thing is already going on privately and started small and has gotten worse. So I think it's justifiable for us to be concerned about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the slippery slope has been deliberately created, because regardless of how this age verification system works or not, I think that the British state, the people at Ofcom, at DCMS, at GCHQ, perhaps, and so on. What's in it for them is the blocking system, the ability to switch stuff off easily without going to court. So to an extent that the age verification system is the excuse for implementing the blocking system, and it's the blocking system that people should be worried about, because the Digital Economy Act says very clearly, here's a definition of pornography, here are the age verification rules, and if you don't abide to these rules, you're going to get blocked. But there's absolutely nothing stopping the Digital Economy Act being updated. It gets updated every couple of years anyway. To add new categories of content, and basically anything that they deem harmful to children, which is a vast range of content. And of course, the all-pervasive hate speech, stroke extremist speech, stroke offensive speech, which to me is almost certainly the next category to be added to the firewall. So I tell, the way I put it is that porn is the beta test of the firewall, and let's not get so hung up about porn, because actually the firewall is a much bigger, more pervasive thing.
Yeah, it is a hard thing to defend to people, isn't it? There's this amongst not everyone, but a lot of people, there's this knee-jerk reaction. It's like, oh, so you want kids to watch face fucking videos or something, do you? No, obviously not. But we're worried about all the other implications. But it does make it difficult.
Yeah, I mean, that's my job basically. So I go on the radio a lot and I point out various things. First of all, this system isn't going to stop teenagers looking at porn anyway. But also, I've written, my book Porn Panic, even though it's mostly about free speech and so on. There's also a chapter on looking at the actual evidence of harm caused by porn, and there isn't any evidence of harm caused by porn, not on the scale that the panics are claiming.
That is a very good book on this subject. I did a review and a recommendation on this channel, so I would recommend buying it. A Billion Wicked Thoughts is a really interesting book on this issue as well. You're published by Zero Books, weren't you? They're pretty Marxist, and somewhat on the new left in some ways. How did you end up working with them?
They were looking for books kind of written from a left-wing perspective about identity politics, and Zero Books are very anti-identity politics, and they come at things from the same point of view as me. I'm not a Marxist, but I used to be one back in the day, and I know there isn't anything less Marxist than identity politics. Marxism was comes from the idea of ultimately being on the side of the working class and the poor, and of uniting poor people against poverty and that kind of thing. And identity politics is pretty much not that. Identity politics is largely about privileged people declaring themselves oppressed, and really, the identity left has pretty much abandoned any lip service to poverty or the poor. Obviously, I mean, they pay a little lip service, but identity politics and class politics aren't compatible. So, while I'm neither a Marxist nor an identitarian, then I guess I have more sympathy with the Marxist perspective than the new left perspective. And Nero books come from the same kind of stable. So Douglas Lane, the publisher at Zero Books, is a Marxist of the old school, and very knowledgeable about Marxist economics and Marxist theory and philosophy and so on.
Yeah.
And of course, and it has come out quite strongly against identity politics. So of course he's been labelled a Nazi, just like I have, and lots of other people have, for standing up
Yeah.
against identity
Yeah,
politics.
me too. I've even been told that free speech is now a dog whistle to the far right. And you've got something of a background, at least according to some of your biographies online, in anti-fascism. So, how does it feel to be accused of that kind of thing?
Like 5-6 years ago, it really hurt. It stung. It's like, why am I being accused of being pro-fascist or far right or alt-right or
Yeah,
racist or Islamophobic or all the things they throw at you to try and make it stick. And there has been a rumor floating around for several years now that I'm Islamophobic, and I can't quite pin down where it's come from or why. And
yeah,
that's you can't counter a rumor that when you just get whispers, people saying, "Oh, by the way, I heard someone told me you're Islamophobic the other day."
yeah. And if you
Um,
fight back, somehow it's taken as confirmation. It's a very elegant Kafka trap. They
Yeah, so I went from kind of being annoyed by it to just, oh well, who cares really? But yeah, you have to be aware that this is a kind of powerful middle class movement, and that it's quite vicious, and that you don't necessarily want to be on the receiving end, and that a lot of the people I was friends with personally on the kind of feminist left and things 5 years ago or so, are convinced that I'm some kind of far right monster, or whatever. It helps that
yeah,
I'm Jewish and have mixed race kids, and I've been, I've had done far more anti-racism activism than most people I know. But it doesn't help that much. You're just kind of branded as some kind of ex left neo-Nazi, blah blah blah.
yeah.
Um,
I've
so
had the
yeah,
same kind of experience. How do you think we got here? Because I mean, the '90s was quite libertine in a lot of ways. I know you were involved in the rave scene. I was involved in the kind of goth industrial scene, which kind of crossed over with BDSM and so on. The left used to be the home of free speech, the Berkeley free speech movement.
yeah.
Tearing down these kind of barriers, and now it's the one propping this stuff up and asking for it to happen. It's just
Yeah, I mean, that's the central question of porn panic. Really, it's like how did we get here? Um, and I can see it because I was an activist in the '80s, and you can kind of pinpoint the moment that it started to flip over. Not to say that any of this is new. I mean, if you read Animal Farm and 1984, then we've been here before, and I think the early communists who supported the Russian Revolution, then had to sit back and watch this absolutely horrific thing unfold in Russia, and it took them decades. It took a lot of communists decades to accept what was going on the left, and now so it's coming round again. But yeah, I mean, there's been a kind of reversal of the polarity where since the '60s, where the kind of pro-liberty voices have moved to the right, and the authoritarian voices have moved to the left, and a lot of the old right-wing ideas have been adopted by the left with new language. So identity politics was a far right thing 30, 40 years ago. It was based around being anti-immigration, white nationalism,
mm,
and far right racism, and that kind of thing. And the rise of identity politics on the left, to replace class politics, is the is what's happened. And I think I pinpoint it in my book because it was my memory. I pinpoint it as the day the miners went back to work in 1985 after the miners' strike.
mm,
So the miners had been on strike for a year, and we on the left kind of always saw the miners as the vanguard of the left. When the miners strike, when the miners come out, then they can topple governments as they had done. They can stop the coal flow, and they can stop they can turn off the electricity supply. And it turned out in 1984-5 that was no longer the case, and so watching the miners' strike was a kind of recognition that the industrial working class was kind of dead as a political force. It was that was the last gasp, and after that, it kind of dissolved, and the trade union movement kind of collapsed, and then the left retreated into the public services and universities, and so you had this very different left, very middle class and white and conservative in its attitudes, kind of brewing in academia and in the civil service and in public service, and that kind of most of us didn't notice. People, as I know, people in academia did. They saw all of these kind of crazies start to take over student unions and with weird ideas. But as I point out in the book, one of the key strands of that new conservative elitist left was the anti-porn feminist movement, which had been born in America in the late 70s. And that's kind of why porn is a part of this story, because the feminist movement, which had been a kind of liberal movement in the 60s, broadly, became, in the 80s, became quite a conservative movement, less about rights than about asserting female power and dividing people by gender and so on. And this, and and feminism is absolutely at the core of identity politics. White middle class feminists are the vanguard of the identitarian left, just as the miners were the vanguard of the old left, if you like. And these are people with very elitist views, often very powerful. They're well represented in the mass media. And, I became interested in how anti-porn, the anti-porn message kind of just got carried in the mainstream press, and especially, as I say, in The Guardian, which had a clique of kind of Oxbridge educated white feminists who were pushing this very conservative agenda through what was once a liberal paper. And that's kind of, in essence, what happened to the left, I think.
What's so strange about that, I find, is, so I'm getting a bit of feedback there. The people that they've harmed are a lot of feminist film directors within the industry. Pandora Blake is the kind of known example. Nika Noel got hounded off Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, feminist politics is a weird thing, because it's really, there's no feminist movement. There are a bunch of different strands. Feminism is the female civil war, really. It's women fighting over what it means to be female, and it has its authoritarians versus libertarians and right versus left and all of that stuff. So yeah, there are a lot of feminist porn makers and stuff. And before there were feminist porn makers, there were lots of women making porn. They just didn't see themselves as feminists necessarily. But the anti-porn feminist movement really identifies pornography as the kind of as a terrible threat to women and to women, and they link it to rape and sexual violence and all those kinds of things. And then the anti-porn feminists, it's like in any war, the anti-porn feminists will hate women that don't agree with them more than they hate anyone else, because they're collaborators, and they use this language. So they see, Andrea Dworkin, who is the ultimate, the godmother of anti-porn feminism, of radical feminism, saw sex as occupation. She saw, the insertion of a penis into a woman as a physical occupation in a war of men against women. And then she saw women who enjoyed sex or who defended sex as collaborators with the enemy. So there's a lot of crazy stuff in feminist politics.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's unfortunately, as feminist porn hasn't really helped the anti-censorship movement particularly, because actually, again, it brings identity politics into the campaign, and it tries to present censorship as an attack on women or an attack on LGBT people or whatever, whereas it isn't. It's an attack on everybody's sexual freedom, and it happens that the majority of porn viewers in the West are cis straight white males who they regard as the enemy. So they kind of, yeah, the narratives are really weird and twisted, and you have, yeah, I mean, the thing about identity politics is that identitarians have to take over everything, and even if something isn't sexist or racist, they have to find a way in which it is, because they don't know that's the only narrative they have.
Yeah, it's almost like they have to justify themselves in doing it.
Yeah, there's no definition of what constitutes feminist porn, and I know a lot of women in the porn industry resent the feminists coming in and declaring themselves the voice of women in porn, because there were women in porn making porn long before anyone thought of calling it feminism.
Was there a moment or an event that really crystallized for you your opposition to censorship? For me, it was the Satanic Panic in the 80s and how that intruded on role-playing games and heavy metal music and things like that. Was there something that just kind of gelled it all together for you?
I think it was encountering an anti-porn radical feminist group called Object, which kind of came and went, and now it's reborn again, and discovering radical feminism in all its conservative nastiness. And because I started kind of going to debates, because I was running a porn business, I'd get invited to debates and university debates. Is porn evil? Yes or no kind of questions, which were quite fun, and it was quite easy to debate against kind of religious types, and then these radical feminists turned up with these weird claims and just endless outright lies, just claiming that they had evidence that porn was making people rape people and stuff, which they had no such evidence. And that really got me interested in it. And then in particular, because I had a lot of friends who were strippers or porn stars, and some of them started getting directly targeted by Object, which is basically a hate group. I had one friend who was being stalked by Object, and they would get her personal details. They would phone her on her mobile when she was on the way to strip jobs and say, "We know where you're going. We know your address. We know where your family lives." Stuff like that. So that was the early kind of awakening for me that something had gone wrong in sections of the left. And then I got more interested in identity politics, and just saw that this stuff was really widespread, and that it wasn't just sections of the left, that the left had imploded as I understood it. I hadn't really been an activist since the early 90s, and this kind of the progressive left, which believed in, say, black and white unity and stuff that was really innocuous and obvious back then, that had just died and been taken over by these nasty elitist bullies.
Yeah, that mirrors my experience. We agree too much. I should ask you more challenging questions.
Yeah, let's disagree on something.
Things I don't agree on, things I don't believe, but which would be interesting. So you've got kids. You're a father, but you're also a free speech campaigner. If you were to bring about a solution to this issue, if you agree it's an issue, how would you go about it? What would you do?
My general position is that I've got a grown-up child and two small ones, and that you have a duty and a right to control what they access, and you have to let go of the reins as kind of quickly as feels comfortable. So they do develop and learn very quickly, and they are way smarter and more switched on than they're given credit for. But when it comes to sexual content, then puberty is the turning point. I think if you don't have much hope in controlling what your teenagers look at, and so if you haven't, your duty by then is to have built an honest relationship and to have educated them, and and hope for the best. But all the evidence anyway suggests that basically guilt tripping kids into believing that porn is bad or addictive or whatever, and trying to stop them doing it till they're 18, is more damaging than gradually letting go. So it's about good parenting as much as anything else. When I do radio shows, I normally get they go, "This is Jerry Barnett, who used to run a porn business and wrote Porn Panic, and this is Jane Smith, who's a concerned mother of 3." And I go, "Oh, hang on a sec, I'm a father of 3 as well. Why didn't you mention that when you introduced me?"
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, being a parent doesn't qualify you for very much, except knowing how to deal with your own kids to some extent.
That idea of taking responsibility or of educating kids, that's something you see more in Europe, I think, particularly the sex education side. Whereas on our little island, we don't seem to take that approach so much. And the same in the States, they seem to shy away from decent sex education and so on.
Yeah. I mean, America's worse than us in every way, except that it has free speech defenses. So American conservatives have just had to accept that porn is there and strip clubs are there, and that's it. Whereas over here, conservatives with a small c are always trying to close down strip clubs and stop people looking at porn and that kind of thing. Britain is kind of the worst of the intersection of Europe and America. We've got all the kind of paternalistic, authoritarian attitudes of Europe, and all of the kind of small-minded anti-sex attitudes of the Americans kind of combined into one.
Okay, I think we've just about covered everything. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
I think not that immediately comes to mind, but I'm sure there are a million other subjects. I think, yeah.
Okay. Do you want to shill your book and your Twitter and your website and everything?
Yeah, so, great. The book is Porn Panic. My Twitter account is also Porn Panic, and the website is sexandcensorship.org, and so is the Facebook page. And to be honest, even though I prefer Twitter as a free speech platform, I find Facebook more bearable most of the time, because Twitter is just so full of just twats a lot of the time.
You have a Patreon to support your activism as well, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And it's patreon.com/Jerry Barnett. And yeah, all of this is kind of slightly ragged at the edges. But yeah, I appreciate people's support, and I'm aiming to produce a lot more content, and also, go on the radio more often and be labelled a threat to children and stuff, which someone has to do it.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure plenty of us are glad that you do. So thanks for the chat, Jerry, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Jim.